hanging out waiting too.
Sweet.
Get Valiant, episode number 103. I think we're live. Um,
We're live. It says live.
we like to do fun stuff when we can, and this is, I don't know, pretty up there on the list of stuff we've gotten to do with this show. For me, we have a very special guest with us, Mr. Kevin Van Hook.
Hey, great to be here again.
I'm really excited that you're joining us. Yeah, I mean, obviously, any Valiant fan, I'm sure, knows who you are and contributions you've made. I know you're also still. I thought it was really cool that you got to go to the set of the Bloodshot movie, so still kind of, staying involved in what's going on with Valiant present and future, and then obviously being still active and creative on top of that as well.
Yeah, no, it was a great opportunity. I had been in touch with Dinesh for years, and before he had put together the deal to start what I still call the new Valiant, even though it's now 6 or 7 years old, but 8 years old maybe. But he was kind enough to offer to fly Bob Layton and myself out and get us some time on the set. We were able to spend almost a week there and check out all the sets and hang out with cast and the crew and spend some time with Vin Diesel and Asa Gonzalez, Sam Heughan, and Alex. It was a really, really unique experience. It was also 24 hours of flying each way. So that was a thing unto itself, but it was all worth it.
Yeah, I've been on those long trips, and traveling for long continuous periods like that can be pretty exhausting, but I'm sure that the experience was more than worth it. Obviously, you've got as your profile picture on Facebook, hanging out with Vin. I don't know. I can't imagine what it'd be like to, get to meet the guy that's bringing this character that, you obviously had a huge hand in shaping, and now kind of, I don't know. I look at that picture as a huge Bloodshot fan myself. I look at that picture as kind of a representation of, where Bloodshot has come from and how he was shaped as a character to, the future, and what I think the movie is definitely going to open the character up to a lot of people who've never heard of him before. So it's kind of like that past and future, and I don't know. It's really exciting to me.
Oh, and definitely for us, it was a great thing. We were there. We flew in on a Friday night. We left on a Tuesday night. So it was a whirlwind trip, but we got to see 4 full days of shooting. And on the next to the last day, we spent a couple hours with Vin. So Bob Layton and myself and I went. So just a little bit of info for those people who may not know. Bob Layton was the editor-in-chief of Valiant during most of my run there, and I was the executive editor. And he had come up with some of the springboard of the idea for where the character of Bloodshot would go in terms of the technology behind it. And then I was assigned the book, and Don Perlin and I created the character as we know it in terms of who Angelo Mortali was and what how the nanites affected him. And in my version, my character was my incarnation of Bloodshot was a mafia hitman who had was engaged to the mafia don's daughter and then fooled around on her and then got set up and thrown in jail. He was framed, and then he was sold into a witness protection program. And secretly, that was to put him into Project Rising Spirit, where he was experimented on and turned into Bloodshot. And we didn't know any of that for the first year. So that was one of the exciting things about telling that story was getting across all these story points to the audience at the same time that the lead character is figuring it out for himself. And so that was something I was very, very fortunate to be a part of. And that was a lot of what we were chatting about with Vin, was what was the theme of the book, what was the point of the book, what was the character like when I wrote it. And for me, thematically, and it's a running theme in my stuff, but thematically it was really about redemption and loyalty. and redemption being the key. Because Angelo Mortale was not a good guy, and but he didn't know that when he became Bloodshot, because he didn't really remember anything. And I kind of was playing with that whole nurture versus nature concept, that when he ended up transformed into this other character, he actually, despite himself, was a good human being. And that's why when we finally did put it all together, I gave him a sort of a new birth and brought him back as Michael Lazarus. So he had gone from being an angel of the dead, Angelo Mortale, to Michael Lazarus, the bringer of rebirth.
So, with your time out there on the set, did you by chance get any kind of option at like looking at the script, seeing anything about the story?
I did. Now, be aware that I signed NDAs up the wazoo, so I can't really talk.
Yeah.
But I have the script. I was actually given a script with my name on it, so it's actually watermarked as both as protection for Sony, I'm sure, but also as a gift to me. And so I have that, and I'm well aware of where they're taking the character and what they're doing with the story, and realize that Valiant, the one I refer to as the new Valiant, but not the classic Valiant, dealt a lot with the Ray Garrison character, and so that's really more of what you're seeing here. And it is different. It's evolving. It's a different story than what I told specifically, but a lot of my underlying structure is in it.
So I feel like what you were saying kind of, I consider obviously, the original Bloodshot stuff to be very defining for who the character is. And then since I've been
the one I like to call the real one. Yeah.
I'm not going to argue that.
I joke because there a lot of really, really talented people have taken turns at writing and drawing that book after I left it.
Well, when I got really into the character was right after The Valiant had come out and Jeff Lemire was taking over the character. And I think a lot of the things that you're talking about that you focused on with the character are the core themes that made Lemire's Reborn so good, because he was focusing on that, because his Ray Garrison was also not that great of a guy, and he kind of had to go through and actually make some sacrifices that he didn't want to make in order to, kind of save the day in the end. And I think that, like you said, that was a lot of what the core of the character was at the beginning. And I feel like that's some of the best stories that have been told in the current incarnation of Valiant and Bloodshot. And I just wonder, I don't know. I don't want to be the jerk asking you tons of questions about the movie that you can't talk about, but I'm just wondering, if you feel like they've really nailed the tone of the character. Do you feel?
I think a lot of the elements that I'm talking about that are tonal and thematic are in the film. So I think there is an underlying aspect of redemption, loyalty, and salvation. I think are core elements of it, and so I think that the people will appreciate that.
Oh yeah, definitely happy to hear that.
So another question I had is that Bloodshot is supposed to be the launch of Valiant's big cinematic universe. Supposedly, this is the movie number one of possibly 5 other movies. As co-creator of Bloodshot, how do you feel knowing that this could be the movie that kind of launches Valiant ship cinematically?
Oh, I think it's very exciting. I think that it's fascinating, because as objective as I can possibly be, I try to stand back and look at it and go, okay, I was 26 years old when I arrived at Valiant in 1992, and I got there in March, very, very end of March, beginning of April, and by November 17th, Bloodshot 1 came out. And so in a really relatively short amount of time, I was able to witness Unity, which was a big deal for us, which opened a lot of doors. I was able to witness The first issues, I actually sent the first issues of Eternal Warrior and Archer and Armstrong to the printer as production manager. And I was working with Barry Windsor Smith and initially with Jim Shooter and Bob Layton very closely. And it was just this incredible time. And I was given this wonderful opportunity. And even though at the time, a lot of the people at Valiant, the senior management and so forth, saw me as this overnight sensation who suddenly went from nothing to doing a book that sold close to 1 million copies. I had been working in comics since I was 17. So I had actually had a career for almost 9 years when that happened. And so I had already been a production manager and art director of 2 other comic book companies by the time that happened. But none of that really could prepare me for how quick we exploded from selling an average of 25 or 30,000 copies of a title to selling, hundreds of thousands on a regular basis. And, Turok 1 selling 1.7 million copies and all that stuff. And this weird period where gold books, these gold logo editions of things that we did would, were like currency. You could take them to a comic shop and exchange them for like $75, which was really cool. But the reason I say all that is I was fortunate to be at the beginning of that explosive growth of a comic book universe. I wasn't there when the doors opened, but I was there pretty early on. I was there 1 year after they started publishing superhero comics. I got Valiant's address out of Magnus 12 to send in my penciling samples, and I sent Magnus 13 to the publisher. So that's how quickly that happened. And so to compare that to now, if everything goes swimmingly, and this is the beginning of a Valiant universe of films, a cinematic universe, much like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the DC Cinematic Universe, then it would be particularly cool to be on the ground floor of that, because it just kind of provides a really nice bookend. Because just as I was 26 years old then, it's been 26 years since I created Bloodshot. So it's literally off my life ago.
That's awesome. So you were talking about by the time you were 26, you'd already been working in comics for nearly a decade. And we actually had a couple questions in the live chat too about how did you get into comics both as a fan and start working in comics, especially at such a young age?
Well, as a little boy, when I was 8 years old, my brother Bill Van Hook, William Van Hook, gave me a How to Draw Flintstones animated cartoon kit, and it was a little bitty light box and some little drawings of the Flintstones cast that you could trace off onto little pre-drawn panels that look like animation storyboard shapes, little television screens. And I started doing that, and I got pretty good at it, and not really thinking about it. It was something I had a little bit of a knack for, and could draw them fairly soon without tracing them. I could, as a little boy, I could look at the picture and go, okay, this is how you draw Fred, and stuff like that. And I wasn't really a cartoonist. I never was, but I liked comic books. And one of the very, very first comic books I ever picked up was the Swamp Thing issue featuring Batman by Bernie Wrightson and Len Wein. And it was just this incredibly iconic thing. Of course, you don't know that when you're 8. But it became this really influential series of images in my mind that today I can still see shots that Bernie drew of Batman, punching and Swamp Thing catching his fist, and these wonderful visceral images that have stuck around for 40 some years. But so I started drawing all the time, and that's what I wanted to do. And I was a big reader, and so I would make up stories that I would want to draw. But I initially always thought I was going to be a comic book artist, not a writer at all. And I was fortunate enough to meet a man named Roger McKenzie. Roger was the guy who wrote Daredevil with Frank Miller before Miller took over Daredevil. And so he did the first year up until Elektra's appearance. And Roger had also written some Tomb of Dracula stuff and Ghost Rider and Captain America and tons of stuff. And he was local to me in Kentucky, where I was going to high school. And local meaning, 35 miles away. I could take a Greyhound bus and go visit, and for $8. And he was a mentor to me. He was somebody who was willing to look at my work and give me feedback and give me a script and say, here, draw this and see what you can do. And he was kind enough to let me tag along with him on a trip to New York to meet with Marvel. He had business there, and I was just tagging along and showing my stuff to editors, and got feedback. And we stayed with Jerry Bingham, who had done the Son of the Demon Batman graphic novel. And we stayed, eventually would do that. He hadn't done it yet at that point. And we stayed with Paul Smith, who was currently drawing the X-Men at the time. And the day I got rejected at Marvel, Paul was kind enough to let me draw 4 little background guys in X-Men 170 in a panel, so I could say I drew in the X-Men the day that they wouldn't give me work. So I worked on their hottest book. And so I would show my work, I would get feedback and criticism, and then soon after that, I was hired by Pacific Comics to draw a story that Roger was writing. We were creating a series called The Sentinel. And we did 3 issues, and unfortunately, before they came out, Pacific folded. They went out of business. And then I did stuff for Eclipse Comics that was also never published. And I had this series of those kind of things for a few years. And then I got some work. By the time I was 22, I drew for Marvel Presents. And I did a Thing story for Marvel Presents. And when I was 23, I helped start a company called Innovation. And I created Jack Frost, which was a black and white series that I wrote and drew with Roger editing it. And that was for Amazing Comics. We did several issues of that. And then I helped form Innovation. And then I went to Caliber Press. And Caliber was in Michigan. So I was, my young wife and I were always willing to move and take a risk and see where it would go. At 23, I had, my wife and I had twin boys that just turned 30. And so we went from Indiana to Wheeling, West Virginia to help start Innovation, and then to basically right outside of Plymouth, Michigan to to join Caliber Press. And then I wrote and drew the Rocky Horror Picture Show movie adaptation, which was a big book for Caliber, big book in the industry. We were, at the time, I think we were probably the number 1 or 2 independent selling title that month. And and it was new for Caliber because it was a color title, it was a licensed property, an adaptation. And then not long after that, I joined Valiant. And I was there for almost 3 years in the offices, and then continued to work for the company for a couple of years in California after I started my company out here. So, but that was kind of the trail. It was initially about drawing, and then somewhere along the way, I realized that I enjoyed writing and I wanted to tell stories, and I also needed to have something to draw, so I didn't want to wait around, and always relying on a writer to come up with a script, and so that's when I did Jack Frost. And there was a series back in the early to mid '80s called John Sable Freelance. And John Sable was an action
Here's
adventure.
what I found on the web.
An action
Back in the
adventure.
early to mid 80s called John Sable.
I said series, and so my phone thought I said, "Hey Siri." But John Sable Freelance was an action adventure book. There was a point where I was up for drawing it, and I didn't get it, and so I ended up creating sort of my own equivalent kind of character, so I could tell the same kinds of stories, and that was Jack Frost. And if you take the superhero component out of Bloodshot, it's the same kind of stories I was telling with Frost, except I tended to do a little bit of a horror bent. And Frost actually made a cameo appearance. I don't know if you read all the original Valiant stuff, but Sean Chen and I did a couple of issues dealing with vampires. And Frost makes a cameo appearance as somebody who's hunting down the vampires and fighting them. And so he got to make an appearance in Bloodshot.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So have you kept up with the other versions of Bloodshot? Like, I don't know if you have read any of the other writers that have worked on it.
I read not a lot. It's always one of those things, just to be completely candid, where it's like it's not my book. So it's kind of hard to see what somebody else is going to do.
Sure.
A writer you mentioned earlier who was very vocal in a Hollywood Reporter article talking about how bad and two-dimensional my version was. And so he was in a good to be able to do a much better job. So I never read anything by him. But,
that doesn't sound like a very good way to come into the cast. I guess I never read that interview.
Really, that one didn't really endear me to him. But there are other wonderful people like Dwayne Swarinski, who I've met, and I read his run, and I read Kaminsky's back years ago, the sort of first non-me version of Bloodshot that was in the acclaimed version.
Sure.
At VH, what we back then called VH2. So Valiant. Right. And I thought he did a really good job with it.
And then I guess you've, like I was saying before, you've stayed busy. Obviously not just working on comics, but directing movies as well.
Yeah, in '94, I before we found out that Acclaim was buying Valiant, I had an opportunity to move my family to California and start teaching myself how to make films, and which is really what I wanted to do. And there was a certain point, you got to realize, from my perspective, however limited it may have been, I had looked at it as rarely being willing to dream the big wish. And so as a little boy, the biggest wish that I would kind of allow was, one day I'll go to New York and make comic books. And then I did that, and it went really well. And so I kind of said, well, I can go to California and make movies. So I literally, that was kind of the process. It's like, I did that, I could do this. And so we Valiant had a program where we were signing people to exclusive contracts. And so I was signed an exclusive contract as a writer for 2 years. And that way I knew I had X amount of income and health insurance. And my wife was a colorist, and she was coloring a book regularly, and she could do that anywhere. And I was already developing the digital coloring process on the side because it was just something I was always been a computer geek. I was a very, very extremely early Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator and Quark Express graphic designer kind of guy. I was telling somebody today that I used Illustrator 88, which was named that because that was the year it came out. And yeah, and I was using it the year it came out. But so we moved to California, and so we went ahead and moved to San Diego, which I had fallen in love with, and set up a studio called Van Hook Studios, where we colored comics and produced quite a bit of art for Valiant primarily. And we continued to handle Bloodshot and then a lot of the Classics Illustrated books. And I expanded my client base, did a lot of trading cards and toy packaging design and that sort of thing, all the while teaching myself how to make films so that I could eventually make movies the way I wanted to. And so my entree to that was going to be visual effects. And so we approached it that way, where I started teaching myself effects, composite, 3D animation, all with an eye towards having a studio that could service the kinds of projects I wanted to do. And we did that in 1996. I made a short film called Drifter. In 97, I shot a trailer to get across the idea of what I wanted to do as my first feature, which was based on my Jack Frost character. And began a year later began shooting the movie, an actual feature film called Frost: Portrait of a Vampire, which had Gary Busey in it, and the rest of the cast were local people, actors I knew and friends. And we were very fortunate. The film took me 5 years to make. It was a long time because it was whenever I could save up money and buy film stock and deal with processing and rent a camera and all that stuff. And I wasn't making a small film, so I had to have, the Afghani Mujahideen and CIA and horses and a half track, all this big action adventure stuff. And but ultimately it came out and was the 18th highest grossing direct-to-DVD release of 2003. And so because of that, I had a little bit of a track record where I could then have an easier time getting my next films made. And I sold my visual effects company to a company called Film Roman. Prior to that, we had done Miss Congeniality and Heart's War. And one of my guys and I, Chad Cole, he and I were on Hercules and Zenith the last 2 seasons and of each show. And the company that I sold my effects house to was acquired by another company, and they bought a DVD company called Anchor Bay. And out of that, they wanted to make movies, and I had a script ready. And so we made The Fallen Ones with Casper Van Dien, Robert Wagner, and Tom Bosley and Jeffrey Lewis, and a great cast. And that sold and did really well. And then we did another one 6 months later, and then we did another one. And then we struck a deal, and I ended up doing 6 films back to back that I wrote, directed, edited, and produced in some fashion. And it just had a really great run. And I've also directed a documentary on the history of makeup effects called Fantastic Flesh. Got to interview and hang out with John Carpenter and Dick Smith and Wes Craven and Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino and a bunch of cool people, and talk about how to make monster movies mostly. And so that was a blast. And then along the way, I wanted to get my hand back in comics, and so I ended up meeting with Dan DiDio at DC, and he was familiar with my stuff and both my comics and my movies. And he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I'd love to do something with Superman and Batman." And he said, "Well, I want you to do something with horror." And so we ended up doing Superman and Batman versus Vampires and Werewolves. And so I did that, and then Oracle the Cure and the Lobo Story series, and Red Tornado Family, which has been kind of considered a go-to source for the Red Tornado. They tend to refer to that miniseries quite a bit when they make references to Red Tornado even today. And some of the characters appeared on Young Justice that I created. So I kept my hand in comics a bit and continued to do visual effects. Did all the my company with my coordinator Jamie Sapp, who works with me, and she's also an artist, and my son Cameron Van Hook. We did all the effects for Rizzoli and Isles TV show for several seasons. We did Law and Order, and spent the last 3 years doing a bunch of theme park stuff for a brand new theme park going into San Diego. So it's we stayed busy. So we've gotten to do a lot of cool things.
So yeah, it definitely sounds like you've been pretty busy. So, right now you have this new movie, Alpha Wolf. How about you tell us a little bit about that?
So I had made The Fallen Ones with Casper Van Dien, and we hit it off and became good friends. And then we made another movie together called Slayer, which is a vampire movie. American soldiers fighting vampires in the jungles of South America. And we had a blast doing that. We shot it down in Puerto Rico. And we hadn't been able to do anything together for a while. And another good friend is a gentleman named Wes Kafer. And Wes had written a werewolf script. And originally we were talking about, let's just do this low budget, just out of our own pockets. And nobody can tell us, that we have to turn it into a story about a pink werewolf or a green werewolf or whatever. It's going to be whatever kind of werewolf we want to make. And we were able to use traditional effects and a real werewolf suit. We worked with Barney Berman. And so we did end up doing it on our own, but we did it for a little bit more money than originally I was thinking. And because we were able to get Casper involved, that gave us a better chance of getting our money back. And then through Casper, we reached out to Patrick Muldoon, who had been with him in Starship Troopers. And it's another mutual friend. And I had originally called on Jennifer Winger, who's an actress who I had met before briefly, but by this point she was Casper's fiance, and I was wanting to hire her initially, and she was really the focus. And then it became, but hey, Casper, if you want to come along, that's great, but I'm not I'm not doing this to get you to do the movie. And so I was thinking if you want to do anything, it'd be a cameo. And he's like, well, who do you got? It's going to play the husband. So he ended up being in it for the whole thing. So the two of them are in every day but one of the shoot. And we reunited with Robert Mukes. Robert and I had done The Fallen Ones together at one point several years ago. He played a giant, and in real life he's like 6'10", so he is a giant. And we did. So we got to get to work together on that, and then I brought a few other actors I've worked with over the years to come and hang out and play for a few days here and there. Mike Gilliland, who'd been in several of my films, lots of my movies for 20 years. Got the honor of being one of the very first deaths in the movie. So he's a hunter that we see in the opening scene, and just had a really good time with it. I got to work with a great crew and all friends, people I knew, and one of my nieces, Melissa Barnett's a brilliant makeup artist, and she was willing to come along and play and do a feature. She'd done lots of independent stuff, but she'd never done a full run on a feature film, and so she stepped up to the plate and did that, and did a great job, and so it was a really good thing. So we've got that coming out November 13th, which is this coming Tuesday, and it's going to be available if anybody is interested. You can grab a Blu-ray or a DVD on Amazon, Walmart, Target, all online, Barnes & Noble, and iTunes has it for streaming. And then it hasn't been confirmed for me, but my understanding is it will be on your basic in-demand on cable systems like Comcast and Charter and that sort of thing.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a traditional horror flick, so it's a fun kind of. I hate to say it's retro or 80s, but there's an aspect of that just because Wes and I are old.
Well, and I think that from what I saw from the preview, the practical effects make it doesn't feel like an overproduced, modern, flashy. It feels more like.
We were definitely trying to create something that was more like the stuff that we loved and grew up with. So.
It makes it more visceral, I think. You know what I mean? Like it feels more real. It doesn't feel quite as fantastical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's the thing. I'm a huge fan of Ray Harryhausen, and I spent several years trying to raise money for a project that I was going to do originally with Ray before he passed away, but I still plan on doing, called Jason and the Necronauts. Which is a continuation of Jason and the Argonauts, where Jason has to travel to Hades and recruit a crew of the dead. But the whole thing that I always think of, like when you say it feels real and feels more visceral, is Ray used to say that he didn't call his creatures monsters; he called them creatures because they had feelings and there was empathy. And I think that's what we tried to create with Alpha Wolf.
Awesome. Well. Yeah, I'm glad it's going to be available in obviously easy to access places. Everybody can get to, Amazon, as we all know.
It was exciting to see. I knew that when we made our distribution deal, I knew that we would do well in terms of having VOD and video on demand and streaming. But I have to admit, I was surprised that we ended up with Blu-ray and DVD deals. As well, not surprised because of the project, but surprised because of the marketplace. It's a dwindling market to be able to sell hard media.
Yeah,
and the fact that it was a nice feeling that there was a vote of confidence in the project to go ahead and manufacture Blu-rays and DVDs.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, what's coming next for you? I mean, obviously you stay busy, so I gotta imagine you got some things in the pipeline. Are we going to get to see any more movies coming soon? Or
yeah, hopefully. Talking about a couple different things. I'm actually looking at taking one existing screenplay and modifying it to turn it into a series. So there's been a lot of interest in this particular project, and the overseas buyers kind of came back to us and said. I think that this is something we could do better with if this was like a 10-episode thing as opposed to a 2-hour movie. And so I need to invest some time in doing that. I have a film that deals with the Nigerian email scam that it's much more of an action thriller that I'm talking to some folks about producing. And I'm actually in talks with Netflix about supervising and producing visual effects for them. But if that goes forward, it probably won't be till after the first of the year. So it's right now I'm doing mostly. There was an old guy I worked with when I was a graphic artist when I was 20 that used to refer to it as hanging fire, because it's where you're basically sitting around waiting for something to happen. So it's but I'm doing a bunch of commissions these days. So I'm because in the visual effects industry anyway, in the film industry in general, at this point in November, almost nobody wants to make a decision to do anything until January, because people go on holiday and just take a break and stop. It used to be somewhere around the middle of December. Now it seems to be after Halloween. So it's always a challenge. But I I put the word out about a week ago that I've started to do commissions for specifically Valiant fans was mostly what I was looking at, although I've gotten some interest in some Rocky Horror Picture Show folks and stuff like that because of the comic adaptation I did years ago. So that's been fun, getting to draw again on a regular basis, on a daily basis, has been cool.
Yeah, well, and obviously you're someone with a lot of experience with comics and comic art, as you were telling us about before. One of the questions that we have in the live chat is, what's your favorite villain that you've gotten to work with in comics?
Well, interesting. I'd have to say one probably that I didn't create, which was Master Dark. I really enjoyed playing with Master Dark, and I believe I would say don't quote me, but I'm being recorded. They don't quote me, but that's basically Barry's creation, Barry Windsor Smith. But it's entirely possible that Bob Layton had a big hand in it as well, because he was the editor-in-chief, and a lot of the ideas flowed in both directions with Bob. But I got to do I think it was a 3-issue run when I wrote Solar Man of the Atom, I called this the story arc in one of the issues, Afraid of the Dark. And I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed writing that character. I also enjoyed Rampage, which I did create which was a villain with Bloodshot, and that was something that was a lot of fun to do. Something that was basically the antithesis of Bloodshot. And I guess with the DC stuff, it would be the characters that Tom Mandrake and I created, the vampire and werewolf specific characters and the mad scientist character. And I was able to give a tip of the hat to the mad scientist character. His name is Herbert Combs, and it was a little nod to my friend Jeffrey Combs, who played the Reanimator, which was Herbert West. And a Lovecraftian character. And Jeff and I got to do a movie called Voodoo Moon together years ago. And so that was just kind of fun to write somebody who, in my mind, even though visually didn't look anything like Jeff, I had him playing the part. I would write the characters.
Yeah, that does sound like fun. So you got to do Kevin Grievous was in the movie Slayer.
Yep.
And now he's taking over writing the new Bloodshot series.
Yes. I'll read that one.
You'll read that one. Do you have any obviously I doubt that you've been sitting over his shoulder watching him work, but since you've had a creative relationship with him in the past, do you feel like you have any idea of where he might go with the character? Do you have any?
I don't. He called me up after it was official that he was going to do it, and just to let me know, and just to kind of say he thought that was really cool that he was going to work on something that I had co-created, and we had a great talk. but no, I don't know. I don't know where he's going story-wise. He's very good. He's a very good writer. And I think you may know this, but Kevin created the story of the underlying story of Underworld, and so that whole franchise, comes from his original concepts. And he's done lots of other stuff too. But he's also a great actor, and just a real pleasure to work with.
He's got like the deepest voice I've ever heard.
Yeah, it's actually 2 octaves below deep. And so it's. I had a producing partner back when I made all that run of movies together back to back, named Karen, and Karen and I worked very closely, and we were just on fire there for about 3 years making movies. And I had my visual effects division had offices all around our office, and we brought in Kevin Gravius for a meeting one day, and after he left, people were coming out and talking about how incredibly deep Kevin's voice is, and somebody said, "Yeah, I just assumed Kevin and Karen were making another deal with the devil." This sounds like that. He's really sweet, but yeah, he's. I'm a mimic, and I can't get in his range easily, but we had like 2 little tiny blips of dialogue in Slayer that needed to be re-recorded because of a mic fumble or something, and I did them with what we used to call a moose cup, which you take a big plastic 32-ounce drinking cup and put it over your mouth in the microphone, and I could get close enough to go, "Hey," and it would reverberate and close enough, and so we didn't have to tweak it too much in post. So.
That's funny. Yeah, I can't. I wouldn't want to have to try to imitate his voice.
Oh, it was no. And so often his opening words to me start off with "dude," and it's so deep, it's so resonant. It's like I can't touch it, but it's just like, but I hear that over the phone. It's like, even if I don't see who's calling, it's like, oh, it's Kevin.
Well, that's cool that you guys know each other, and obviously seem to be on really good terms, because that just makes it, I don't know. As a Bloodshot fan, that makes me just happy that obviously he has respect for you and for, your vision of the character, and is gonna, I'm sure, be respectful in the way that he handles the character. And
I think he'll knock it out of the park. I've read some of his other comic stuff, and I've always enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And he's a genuine fan of comics.
Right.
And I think most creators are. I mean, it's easy to take pot shots and say, oh, this person just likes it because of the paycheck, or they really want to make movies or whatever. But but I think in reality, most of us really do enjoy the medium and enjoy what we grew up with, and want to be honorable of that.
So, do you see yourself getting back into comics at any point?
I do, but when I make phone calls and they don't get returned, I just it's definitely open. I mean, I've talked over the years about doing stuff with various things. Periodically, DC and I have conversations where we talk about me maybe doing a relaunch of Martian Manhunter or something like that. That was a few years ago. For various reasons, mostly marketing related, that didn't happen. But I think they're doing a new one now with that character. I met with their executive editor, Pat McCallum, over the summer, just to say, hey, I'm available. I love working with you guys if we can come up with something. So just trying to find something that makes sense schedule-wise and opening, because they're like most publishers. There's a lot of things that are driven from a marketing standpoint of technical needs of this character hasn't been shown for a while. We need to do something with that character, or kind of keep it alive and keep it in play, and those kind of things. And then you also deal with, and this has hit me several times over the years. We'll start down a path, and I was writing a Detective Comics annual and a Batman annual that crossed over. They were basically finished treatments, and then suddenly it was like, yeah, they're killing the annuals because they're going to be using basically that budget money because of a big crossover they were doing with something. And it's like, okay, so it just went away. So those kind of things happen, or they use the annuals to be as part of that crossover. So somebody who's telling another part of the story needed to paint those pages to tell their story. Valiant and we've other than let me make sure I don't misspeak here. Other than an 8-page story that Don Perlin and I drew in, I think it's in Bloodshot Masterworks or Masters. I don't think I've written anything for the new company. I drew part of the sort of jam cover for XO 50. I drew one of the XOs, and I know I drew an Archer and Armstrong pinup, but I don't know if they ever published it. But so every now and then I'll get a phone call saying, hey, you feel like drawing something, and but I haven't written anything for it.
Well, definitely.
But I have
ideas. If you do though, definitely let us know.
No, there's things I wanted to do. There was a point where I was going after the rights for the characters before Acclaim went bankrupt and before the characters went into limbo for years, and I wanted to be able to do things that the original Valiant had talked about, had prophesied. So things like the death of Shadow Man in 1999, and those kinds of moments. Pete Stanchik disappearing, Bloodshot being killed on the moon. Those kinds of things. I wanted to try to tell those little vignette stories. And 6 or 8 months ago, I had an idea for something I wanted to do that I still think would be cool, which was an Eternal Warrior story, but set during that time period when Bloodshot is killed by Axe on the moon, because he contained the blood of heroes that would eventually be put into Rye. And I wanted to deal with something where the Eternal Warrior, because he's immortal, can handle this, ends up basically being a temporary living vessel for the blood of heroes. So he becomes the Eternal Bloodshot for a brief storyline until the transfusion basically sucks all the nanite blood out of him.
I've wondered why they haven't done that, like a Bloodshot XO story or something. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
that.
Lots of cool possibilities, and it's
seems like low-hanging fruit.
And maybe that's why they don't want to do it. I don't know.
Maybe.
Odd things.
A lot of us, well, obviously, like you said, I mean, your involvement in the new version of the company hasn't been as deep as it was previously, but something that a lot of us fans have had massive reactions on, and there's a couple questions about your thoughts on the DMG takeover and whether what you think, that if you have any insight on what that might mean for the future of the company.
I really don't, in all honesty. I mean, I know from a personal side that one of my friends was no longer there, and that came out of that and was kind of pushed out. And I know that a lot of other staff members left either in solidarity or just coincidentally following that situation. But I still have friends there. So it's as a human being, it's a little awkward. I mean, I've got a 26-year-old relationship with Fred Pierce, who's I think his title is either president or publisher. A dear friend. I care for him. He's still very much a part of that company, and I want to see it succeed for him. I don't know the DMG people. Never met them. Never had a conversation.
Hopefully, the talent that they're bringing in will be, good for the characters in the universe. And
yeah, I hope so.
But
I mean, I've heard nothing but good things about the editorial staff that they've brought in.
Yeah, things seem to be going hopefully fairly well, and hopefully that continues. We've got new series coming, and actually, we were talking about Kevin taking over writing duties on Bloodshot, and that's going to be coming out this coming week. I don't know. I don't know if you've gotten to check any of it out, but Christos Gage has been doing the Ninja K title as well, and that's actually nearing completion. But that's the other one coming out.
I do have to take the opportunity to point out that when Bob Layton conceived of Ninjak, and he came back from a trip and I was writing a Bloodshot story that dealt with a character called the Weaponeer, and we decided that we were going to make the Weaponeer an alter ego of Ninjak, and I created the personality or the persona of Colin King, naming him after a couple of my favorite horror writers, Colin Wilson and Stephen King. I had to give Bob grief and say, "You just added a K to Ninja. It's just like Ninja K." And so that all these years later, there's actually a book called Ninja K.
Well, I think that they had that. I don't remember who it was, but I read in an interview that supposedly there was the idea to explore that in a Ninjak story and talk about there being a Ninja A and a Ninja B or whatever.
I heard that too, but I heard that in this newer incarnation, not in our timeline.
Okay.
In ours, it was really Bob combined ninjas and hijackers.
Fair enough. Hey, and it turned into a really awesome character. So.
Oh, it was. Casada and Palmiotti did a beautiful job on the art, and Moretti did great stories. And the original stuff was really, really cool. I wasn't, due to no fault of the talent, it's just that the take was different. I wasn't as big a fan of the more anime kid version of Ninjak that followed in VH2, which was like 95, 96, whenever that was. But the original stuff I thought was just really cool. I was actually the editor of the original one and I scripted, I think, issues 5 and 6, and wrote Ninjak's first appearances in Bloodshot 5 and 6, and out of costume and then in costume.
Awesome. Well, I don't know. I don't want to keep you all night, and I don't know how much we want to force you to just ramble for us. But no, I want to thank you very much for giving us a lot of insight into your history with comic books and the industry, and obviously with Valiant and my personal favorite character, Bloodshot.
Well, thank you very much, and I think I've been slouching, so I need to show that. My Bloodshot stunt team shirt from the movie set that I got from the stunt guys.
That's so awesome.
Got to see a big stunt, a vehicle stunt, which was really cool while we were there. And I've done a lot with stunt people in my films, and so I know I'm a portly fellow, but I still identify with stuntmen. I used to kickbox and stuff, and had a lot to do with stunt work. The only honor I've ever gotten from the TV Academy is actually for my contribution to stunt coordinating on the TV series Southland. So it was really cool to get to hang out with J.J. Perry over in Cape Town, South Africa, who was doing the stunt coordinating on Bloodshot. And we've got we had never met, but we have a lot of mutual friends. So that was just a neat thing to do.
So we haven't seen anything with Vin actually in character. Did you get to see any of that? And if so...
By the time I was there, it was primarily bits and pieces being shot. So it was essentially, you think of it in terms of the main movie has been photographed, and now we're just like filling in holes, and here are tight close-ups of this and that and so forth. And as I mentioned, it was a big stunt. And I got to see a little bit with Vin, and but more with Sam Heughan from Outlander, who was just a hello sweet guy. And his character, and a young man who's forgive me, the last name escapes me, but named Alex, and Asa Gonzalez. I got to see a pretty cool fight scene with her. But in answer to your question, no, I didn't get to see anything that shows him the way we might associate Bloodshot.
Are we going to see a cameo of you in the movie?
Not in the film. There is a shot that Bob and I did for Grins and Kicks that they rolled on in an elevator. So it's a wide shot that they say they're going to try to get it onto the extras, the DVD extras. We'll see if that happens. But it's Bob and I, stepping out of an elevator, looking around, realizing like they're making a movie here, and I just like ducking back and going back inside. So it's just something just to be cute. And we were hanging out with the guy who was controlling the camera. We said, roll on this. So we went over there and just did it. So that was fun.
Hopefully that makes it on the DVD.
Yeah. We also did some interviews and things like that. We did behind the scenes interviews with their press people, which was good.
Awesome.
And got to talk about things. And also, I try to make it a point, and I know you guys probably noticed that I name names. I try to make it a point when I can to shout out to people like Don Perlin. Don's 89 years old and co-created Bloodshot with us, and at this stage, it wasn't really viable for him to make a trip like that with us. It's just a really long trip and very tough on him. But I want to make sure that he gets his props. And it was one of the coolest things in the world. As I mentioned earlier, I was 26, he was 62, and so we went into signings and things. And one of the coolest things was getting to go to his local Brooklyn neighborhood store and be paid to do a signing, and for him to be getting all this attention, because he'd had this really, really long career and done wonderful work and been known for The Defenders and Werewolf by Night and all this stuff, but it never really had a breakout runaway hit like that. And so it was just cool. Even if I had nothing to do with it, I would have thought it was really neat to just been on the sidelines and see him get that kind of attention. It was so well deserved at that point.
Yeah, obviously a great artist.
Yeah, no, great storyteller, and he had worked with Will Eisner, and he had worked with Mike Klug and all kinds of people, and was a staffer up at Marvel, and new storytelling left and right. So it was great to be able to not just work with him, but to collaborate with him on a character and do stuff. So, and because of the fact that the book was popular, we tended to fly around and do store appearances and things like that together. So that was just kind of neat. So.
Yeah, definitely nice perk of that project being successful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to thank you for joining us and hanging out and talking about your experience. Obviously, going to meet Vin, see the movie getting made, and
I appreciate it. No, it's been a really good experience for me. I enjoy talking about the stuff and interacting with fans. I mentioned to you before we got going real quick. I just mentioned this: the Valiant fans website. Some of those people I've had some kind of correspondence with for over 20 years, and so it's neat, and it's interesting because. In my mind, a lot of times I don't really pay attention to the passage of time as clearly. And then I'll meet somebody who's clearly like a 40-some-year-old man, and it's like, but you were like 14 when you wrote me a fan letter. It's like, granted, I was only maybe 12 years older, but still, so it's interesting to meet some of these guys who've had a passion for the books and the characters for that long. Yeah. Well, thank you both. And any other questions, Josh, from you at all before I sign off here?
No, I think I'm good.
Awesome. Well, very good. It's been great spending time with you guys.
Yeah, I can't thank you enough. And I want to again, make sure everybody knows. Go check out Alpha Wolf when that's coming out very shortly on Tuesday.
Okay.
Starring Jasper Van Dien, Jennifer Winger, and Patrick Muldoon.
Yeah. Great cast. The trailer, which anybody can look up on YouTube, it shows that the movie's obviously going to be a lot of fun. So definitely very something I hope everybody checks out.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And, let's do this again as we get closer to the movie coming out or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And whenever your next project is, whenever your next movie's coming out or whatever you've got going on, if you want to talk about it, we're always definitely open to have you come by.
That'd be wonderful. All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys. You take care.
Yeah, you too. Well, and I also want to thank everybody for watching and listening and hanging out with us. Tried to get to, questions in the live chat and everything, but I don't know. Bloodshot is like my favorite friggin' character, and it was a really big deal to me. So I felt very awkward this entire episode because I don't know how to I just want to spend the whole time being like, "Thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much."
One thing I do want to say about this entire experience is when we very first started doing the podcast 3 years ago, I always thought a guy like Kevin would be like the best guy, like one of the best guys ever to talk to, just because I got in with Bloodshot. That's like that was my entry to Valiant. So like to me, like he's like one of those like to me he's a guy just like Jim Shooter. Like he's a guy that I associate so much with the brand, the characters that I enjoy. So for me, like this is definitely like a really cool moment. You know?
Yeah. It's I know that, there are a lot of ways to that this analogy might be inaccurate, but because Bloodshot is such a big deal to me, Kevin Van Hook is a little bit like my Stan Lee, you know. So, and I get that Stan Lee created 8 billion characters that all went on to be iconic, but I
Also
just
created them.
well took credit for creating them. That's one thing that makes Kevin clearly a lot better than Stan Lee or Bob Kane, because obviously Kevin is very quick to tell you the other people that were involved in the things that he gets credit for.
Yeah,
He doesn't run around saying like I'm the guy that did this and I'm the guy that did that. He says, well, I did have a part in that with these other people that helped me, and a lot of respect for him.
yeah, very cool.
Yeah. Also wanted to call back to something that Kevin mentioned, and Jason Falter actually just made a comment about in the live chat. That apparently Lemire did have some pretty nasty things to say about Bloodshot when he was first coming into the character, both about the character itself and how the character was handled previously, and that's kind of a bummer because I think that Lemire did a lot with the character, but as we were talking about with Kevin, the best parts about Lemire's run with Bloodshot were him paying homage to what Kevin was trying to do with the character and the themes that were most important, to when Kevin created these stories. So I don't know. That's a bit of a
Well,
bummer for me.
well, thank you for making everything so awkward, Eric. Okay.
I know. I don't know how else to be. I don't know how else to be.
No, I don't think Kevin was bothered. He was awesome. Like he was so
Yeah.
cool about everything. So but man, what an episode. Like for to me, like this was a special one. So I'm
This
glad
is the
that
best non-book week ever, I think.
definitely. I wish we could do this. I wish we could do stuff like this more often when there's no books coming out. And I feel like
Yeah.
there's fucking probably like half the weeks until Christmas. So it could be like that. Who knows?
Oh man. Well, thanks again everybody for coming on. Hopefully, we didn't scare Kevin away from coming back. I think he's probably too nice a guy to be like, "Oh, you guys are weird." Like a bunch of weirdos.
But in a way, if somebody was that straightforward, how awesome would that be if they're just like, peace out, I don't want to be back, don't talk to me, you guys suck.
Yeah, I would respect that too. But no, thanks again everybody. This has been episode 103 of Get Valiant signing off. I'm Eric Baumgard,
And I'm Josh Rathbun.
and I want you all to stay valiant, stay bloodshot, and go check out Alpha Wolf.
Hell yeah.